Welcome to Media Morsels, the podcast about creativity and the media that feeds it. I'm Jessica, character and aesthetic connoisseur.
I'm Jamie, plot guy.
And I'm Mitchy, watching this dog slowly devour this Chewy.
Honestly, I think we should keep that, but then take the Chewy away from him.
And I'm Mitchy, here for the aesthetic and the scenery.
To chew it, maybe?
To chew the scenery like this dog chews a rawhide.
He is chasing that.
Oh my
thing.
god.
Buddy.
Okay.
That definitely got caught.
Yeah, get you guys some good dog ASMR. So, as you may have noticed, we have some set pet sounds. Bo is eagerly devouring a rawhide, and
That's his media morsel.
that's his morsel. We don't have the heart to take it away from him because it is quite late at night, and he's been waiting all day for us all to be in the same room so he can chew the chewy. The weary.
Weary dog parent sigh.
Oh my god, Bo. Oh my god, it
He's
just
so
sounds
loud.
so bad. Bo.
He's fighting you for it.
Bo. Just let him finish it. Just let him finish it.
Is he gonna finish it fast enough?
Yeah, but just let him finish it. He will finish it quickly. Welcome to Media Morsels, the podcast about creativity and the media that feeds it. I'm Jessica, character and aesthetic connoisseur.
I am Jamie, plot guy.
I'm Mitchy. I'm the guy that chews the scenery.
And this week we are talking about The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, 1947. So this is being that it was made in 1947, it is considered a classic movie. It is definitely like a romantic drama, I'd say.
Yeah,
It has comedy elements, but I think
Yeah.
it's much more on the side of like a romance drama.
Yeah, it doesn't go into rom-com territory.
But it is kind of an unusual romance at the same time.
Exceptionally.
It's
Yeah.
a bit hard to define genre-wise and just vibe.
Which we will definitely get into as we get further into the episode. But for now, we'll kind of segue quickly into our appetizer round. My first experience with this movie was probably when I was like an early teen, like 13, 14, 15, somewhere in that range. And I think my mom knew this movie. She'd watched it growing up. And we saw this at our local library at the time. And she rented it. And we watched it. And I loved it. And eventually, I guess we bought the DVD. And I watched it again and again and again. It was just such an interesting... Such a different kind of romance, and I found the premise intriguing, which we will get to in a minute. And what about you guys?
So Jamie here. So I can't really pin down the first time I saw this movie. Probably like late teens, early 20s, I want to say, because we were living stateside at the time. But I definitely saw it with my folks, because they're the kind of people that have Turner Classic Movies on like at all hours of the day. Yeah, just constantly, which is great, because there's like tons of great movies on there. And this is one of the ones that came up, and I just fell in love with it immediately. It's an excellent movie. When I was younger, like, I'm not going to spoil the end, but the end hit me a lot sadder than it does now.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that, but it's interesting to come back to it. Like, I've seen this movie a handful of times between then and now, but it just hit different this time around.
It makes a lot of unusual and compelling narrative choices.
Yes.
My first experience was just the other day, honestly. I was brought in, it's like, hey, have you ever seen The Ghost of Mrs. Muir? And I'm like, the what now? Mrs. Mirror? What? Mirror. Oh,
Mirror.
okay, what's it about? Well, we're going to find out.
That's basically how that went down, yeah.
Yeah. And so, Jamie, do you want to sort of take it from the sort of spoiler-free synopsis?
This movie follows the story of Lucy, a recently widowed English housewife, mother of one, and she is leaving her in-laws' house to strike out on her own and make her own life. She rents a seaside cottage that's been recently vacated. So they say. But it turns out that it's still occupied by the ghost of a grumpy sea captain.
And the rest, as they say,
Is
history.
the story.
Well, the story, yeah. and shenanigans ensue.
That's a great way. There's actually a healthy bit of shenanigans in this movie.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. Is she by me? Is she by?
Yeah.
Okay, is she asking to come in?
Not yet.
Okay.
But she's looking. Yep, no, she just started.
Pa.
Do we need to pause?
No.
Shut up.
Get in here.
Hey, if I'm not threatened with death at least once per day for puns, then am I even alive?
Not even a real dad. You're a faux pas.
Shut up!
Yeah, with that, let's go ahead and get into the main course.
The meat of it.
The meat of this.
Well, this is more like a surf and turf, I want to say.
Oh my
Yeah.
god.
I just said.
Okay, so. Alright, so The Ghost of Mrs. Muir starts out, as Jamie said, with a recently widowed woman, Lucy Muir, and her daughter Anna, as they kind of extricate themselves from the really highly manipulative clutches of her in-laws.
So I don't know if you've seen that. Like, it was a very interesting scene. Basically, she went in, and it opens with Lucy just essentially breaking up with her in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And her in-laws just going completely ballistic because they're exceptionally...
Shitty.
Well, and they have there's this interesting dynamic where the mother-in-law is just like, she's constantly weepy, but in like a manipulative, weepy way.
Like, look how sad you're making me!
Yeah. And the sister-in-law is she's just kind of plain nasty. She's
Yeah.
like really controlling. But Lucy puts her foot down. It's like been a year since her husband died. She's kind of ready to move on with her life. And so she, her daughter, and her housemaid Martha strike out for the coast, where she is looking for a really cheap place to live. Somewhere that it's nice, but she can live cheaply, like
Off of
frugally.
off of her husband's kind of meager inheritance.
Yes.
So she goes to this realtor, who honestly is not nearly as skeevy as typical realtors, in my opinion.
I mean, apologies to any realtors listening, but
He seemed really well-intentioned, but he's also very much like, he's like a lot of men in this film, actually just a lot of people in this film, who are basically like, you don't know your own mind, little miss.
except British instead of country.
Yes. But it turned, like, Lucy does know her own mind, and she's not like belligerent about it. She's just insistent about it.
Well, yeah, the funny part about this sequence is, like, from the jump, there's this one specific property that the realtor does not want to show her. He just completely skips over the summary sheet for one specific property. He's like, no, this wouldn't suit you at all. And she's like, immediately like, well, but why would you think that? And like, just takes the sheet from him and looks over and is like, well, this seems perfect to me. Show me it now. And he's like, no, show me it.
Yeah, she was like, well, I'm sure that another realtor agency in town probably has Gull Cottage listed, so...
Well, yeah, it's great. So, like, Lucy's theme for this film is basically stated in that opening scene. She's like, I've never lived a life for my own. I'm going to do that now.
Yeah.
And good lord, does she ever commit to that?
She does.
Because throughout this whole film, she takes no shit.
Mostly.
Except for one
asterisk.
very important exception, which we will get to.
Yeah.
But So the realtor grudgingly takes her out to the house in his motor car.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the Edwardian era, and that's still hot new shit.
Man,
Yeah.
can we take a second to talk about the realtor's drip?
He's wearing this, like, Edwardian motorist riding getup, including the goggles and everything, and it's honestly the fashion in this movie.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Especially Lucy's dresses. Like,
We can double back to that once we're done
Yes.
with the summary, but suffice to say, Edwardian drip abounds.
yeah.
But they get to the house, and he doesn't even want to go in. But, of course, Lucy just bulldozes through.
And she falls in love with the house
Because the house is
immediately.
wonderful. It's this coastal English property.
Oh, yeah.
Overlooking the sea on a dramatic
I
cliff.
fell in love with this house immediately.
We all did.
Yeah, honestly, like, I feel like Dobby is buried in one of those sand dunes.
Yeah, it's got those vibes. Not to bring up She Who Must Not Be Named. But she immediately falls in love with the house.
She starts asking questions about why it's been vacant
right.
for 4 years, and she finds this portrait in the downstairs living room of this man, and
The former owner.
the former
incidentally.
owner, and the realtor explains that he was the former owner and that he had died. Yeah, she's looking around. They've, gone through the first floor. She loves it. They're on the second floor. Oh my God, this is so funny. And she's making some observation about the telescope in the master bedroom, which, I mean,
It's
I want a
incredible.
telescope in our master bedroom. But suddenly this sort of maniacal cackling starts up. And she turns around to look at the realtor because she thinks it's him. And of course, and he's already booking it out the door.
Yeah.
And not only does he booking
leaves
it
and
out
he
the door
closes the door behind him with her stuck in the room.
inside. So he's just totally leaving her to the wolves here. And
Every man but one fails her in this movie.
yes, really. And so she ends up following him out of the house. She's a little spooked too. But then that's where the realtor explains this house is haunted and it's driving me to drink, I tell you. And she's like, well, why does he haunt? And he's like, oh, she's like, was he murdered? And the realtor says, no, he committed suicide. And she's like, suicide. But you could tell she's so intrigued by this whole
low-key
thing.
kind of excited about it. Like true crime podcaster sort of excited, like, oh, that's so terrible. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Either that or, Evie from The Mummy.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's got that sort of same, like, bookish pluckiness.
An adventurous spirit.
Yeah.
And so she's just like, this is marvelous. I absolutely want this cottage. Not necessarily because it's haunted, but being haunted
doesn't hurt.
adds a little extra special interest. And then she starts kind of downplaying it. She's like, I'm sure it's not really haunted. I'm sure that was just like
This is
our
the
minds.
20th century.
This is the 20th century. It was just our minds playing tricks on
The
us.
sound of the wind coming from the fireplace. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. So she takes the house. And the first night that they're there,
Everybody else goes to bed.
Everybody else
She's
goes to bed.
up alone, heating some water.
And her matches keep going out. And finally, she just sets everything down. And she's like, I know you're here. What, are you like a coward or something?
Yeah,
you're not gonna
she's-
show your face?
Honestly, she has kind of like Zach Bagans from Ghost Hunters energy. She's like, come at me, ghost.
Yeah, or like Shane Madej.
Yeah. Like, hey, demons, it's me, ya boy.
Yeah, she dares him to come out. And, then she hears this voice saying light the candle. And so she lights the candle, and there he is, and it's the captain from the portrait.
And oh no, he's hot.
Oh no, he's hot. and they end up having this conversation, and thus begins sort of
a truce.
a truce between them. Basically, she doesn't scare easy. He doesn't want anyone in this house because he had plans for this house, and he designed this house himself, and he's just not done with it, and he doesn't want anybody in the house. But she basically pushes back in various ways, first by sort of raging at him, and then breaking down into tears, which may or may not be crocodile tears.
Yeah, we all kind of took something different away from that part.
Yeah.
So
Keep in mind that whenever she first meets the ghost, she's also wearing her dress that sort of looks like Wednesday Addams.
Yeah.
this is a brief aside. But I know a little bit about Victorian mourning wear, and the Edwardian period was still coming off of that. So she's ending her first year of mourning her husband. And they had these very, like, sort of, like, defined eras, like, phases of mourning. Full mourning would be all black, and then you would go through different phases of, like, half and quarter mourning, where you introduce more and more color. So this, like, introduction of the white collar, she's, like, further along in, and things like that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Notably, her sister and mother-in-law never come out of full mourning for the entire length of this film.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I noticed that.
But I also think it's kind of interesting that she's, like, wearing this mourning gear while meeting a ghost. I think it's kind of interesting.
This movie plays a lot with life and death.
Well,
in that
yeah,
way,
it's all about like life and death and love and
So going back to the crocodile tears. So what happens is the captain upsets her and she turns towards the camera and like bolts towards this, side,
doorway.
the
Yeah,
doorway,
doorframe.
and she leans into it and leans towards the camera with her face like full view in the camera. And like she's doing the Hollywood, typical Hollywood crying.
yeah.
But at the same time, like, there's a few instances where she's just smirking a little bit too much.
I see. So that's what you guys took away from it. For me, I just think that women in Hollywood at that time really were not allowed to like ugly cry. So you're just supposed to get the feeling that she's crying. So I don't know if it's crocodile tears or if they're meant to be genuine tears. I took this as more like genuine tears where she's just like, I love this house. I just want a life of my own. I love this house. This house called to me. I'm sure you, ghost man, wouldn't understand. And he basically is just like, I can't stand it when women cry. Well, fine. You can stay on trial. Oh, and also during this time period, he explains that he didn't kill himself.
It was an accident.
It was an
Yeah.
accident. He had like this like gas heater on in his room, and there was also a storm outside, and he closed the windows of his bedroom, and while he was sleeping he kicked on the gas and accidentally died.
Yeah. So I've got two follow-ups to that. So I've watched a lot of old movies and seen the Hollywood starlet cry. I did see her crack a very small, smug smile in the middle of this, so I feel like it's sort of in between, like she's having a genuine like upset reaction, but she
she's also
might
a
also
little
be like,
manipulative.
but I can also maybe use this because Lucy and Daniel, the ghost, are playing off of each other from the jump.
Well, and
It's
they're also
immediate, and
they're-
it's wonderful.
They're both smart, and they both play into certain people's expectations for them and subvert them at the same time.
That's absolutely
and
true.
In a way that isn't skeezy.
Well, yeah, it's playful and fun because they're both sort of on the same... There's no gross power dynamic here. They're both kind of on a level playing field.
Yeah.
The second thing I was going to bring up is prior to her first visual meeting with the captain, the very first instance of haunting, aside from the
cackling.
the cackling with the realtor, is Lucy takes a nap on move-in day, and the windows open up of their own accord. She takes
Yeah.
a nap in the seat that he died in, and he opens the windows so she doesn't do what he did.
Yeah.
So his first act is one of caring.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, yeah.
So from the jump, these two have something special going on.
Yeah, like and Captain Daniel Gregg he's very gruff, he uses coarse language.
He's a
He's
sailor.
totally unapologetic about his life and his like I guess manliness and stuff like that. But it's very clear that he's also he understands human nature. He accepts people for who they are, and he is primarily motivated by compassion, even if he is really gruff.
He's essentially the perfect romance novel love interest.
Yes, he
because
is.
he is the rugged, manly archetype, classically handsome, but with a soft, gentle poet's soul.
Yeah, he literally, when they're later talking about the house, which Lucy loves so much, he starts quoting Keats. And she's just like, oh my God, Keats. Also, you designed this house, which she finds particularly fantastic because her late husband apparently had been an architect, but he wasn't a very good one. But she fell in love with him when she was 17, and he had come to design an addition to her father's house, and she had just read this novel about, the heroine being kissed in the the garden, and when her late husband kissed her in the orchard, she thought that she
got
was
swept up in the
her
romantic
feet.
notion.
She got swept up in the idea of him. And so he wasn't like a bad husband, he just wasn't a particularly there was nothing really exciting about him.
But there's plenty that's exciting about Captain Daniel. Except that he has no corporeal form.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a romance of the minds. But anyway, so pretty quickly, so they're settling into the house. She says there's going to be some ground rules, and he agrees. She's like, you will not talk to my daughter. You will only appear to me. And he's like, that's fine, if you keep my room exactly as it is, and if you take my portrait into the room. And so she does that. And for a while, they're kind of getting along swimmingly. They kind of chat from time to time.
Also, there was only one room, though.
But there was only one bed.
You forgot about the most key part about it.
There was only one bed.
And she's like, there's this really great scene where it's the first night, she takes his portrait up into the bedroom, and she starts to get undressed, sees in the mirror that his portrait is looking, it looks like it's looking at her, so she goes and covers it up, and then she's like, haha, this is fine, and she undresses and gets ready for bed, and as soon as she's in bed, you hear Captain Daniel saying, my dear, never let anyone shame you about your figure, or something like that. And he's
the ghost is checking you out.
He's basically whenever she calls him on it, he's like, woman, I have no body.
Mm-hmm. I don't pose a threat to you, but I do appreciate what I see.
But I think he's like, I'm just saying, I calls it like I sees it, and you're a pretty gal.
He doesn't say this line, but the meaning here is, I may be dead, but I'm not blind.
I may be dead, but I'm not dead.
So things go kind of swimmingly for a little bit, and then the in-laws show back up.
Yes,
and
unexpectedly.
And in their typical fashion, they are horribly manipulative. They're like, oh no, didn't you hear? Your late husband's investments have all dried up, and now you're destitute and have to move back in with us.
Well, and they're like, and we've arrived just in the nick of time, because it seems like you're talking to yourself, because
they see her speaking with the ghost.
Daniel is fucking around and, talking to Lucy while they're in the room, and she's trying to keep her shit together, but she's very rattled by by them showing up unexpectedly and by the news that they've given her. And he pretty immediately is like, she's just kind of she doesn't know what to do, and he's like, don't worry about it, we'll figure out a way for you to stay here.
It's like, hey, do you want me to haunt them? Because I can totally haunt them.
And initially she says no. However, towards the end of the interaction, she says, actually, yes, get them out of here. And he just shoves them out the front door, essentially. And it's great.
While Anna, Lucy's daughter, is just watching as her grandmother and her aunt are just catapulted out the door, essentially.
It's fantastic.
So basically, they're trying to figure out how Lucy and Anna and her housekeeper, Martha, can all stay at Gull Cottage. And they try, I think, Lucy tries a couple of different things, but finally Daniel is like, no, you don't need to let rooms out to boarders. You don't need to seduce or marry the realtor, which is what he thought she was doing. And it's sort of the first sign that maybe he's has a slightly jealous streak. But he's like, no, what you're going to do is write a book, and it will be my book, the story of my life, unvarnished, the tale of a real sailor.
Titled Blood and Swash.
Blood and Swash. And she's just like, what? And he's like, it's meant to be sensational. And he's like, and since we're going to be writing this book together, you will call me Daniel, and I will call you Lucia.
Yeah, he
He's like-
nicknames her. He gives her a sexy nickname.
He gives her like a sexy, freeing, like adventurous nickname.
What was it he was saying about Lucy's? Like Lucy's are very, easy to just
like
kinda,
very retiring, and
Yeah, like a doormat. And he's like, but
Lucia is a queen.
Yes.
Yeah, he's romanticizing her here, and
Yes.
honestly, like
He's lionizing her, and that's
Yes.
exactly what she needed. She needed somebody to like prop her up a bit.
In all honesty, though, like she already was expressing that queen energy.
She was.
she was
Nice.
on her way, and he blew on that fire.
Yeah.
He blew on the embers.
I think one of the interesting things that we'll probably get to later is how the characters are very human and that they are inconsistent in some ways and contradictory, but in human ways, not in a way that makes you feel like the narrative is jerking you around, but like, oh, this is like just humans and their flaws and their foibles and all that stuff. So they embark on writing this book together, and it's a grand old time. It's hilarious because he is giving this story, as he said, in this unvarnished fashion. And, she's using language that she would have never used before.
And then
in this very clever Hays Code era way of, implying things.
And we get to my favorite scene in the entire movie, where she's transcribing some of the story notes into typewriter, and she's typing away, and she gets to the end of a sentence, and she just says, well, I've never used that word before. And he's like, what? It's a perfectly good word. What word do you use when you talk about that? And she's like, well, I simply don't talk about that. And it's never said what they are talking about, but there's a specific treat about Hays Code movies where they could still be very dirty. They just had to be sneaky about it, which in specific instances made them feel a lot dirtier.
Because it leaves it up to your imagination.
And just like in horror, when it comes to smut, if you are allowed to fill in the gaps on your own, whatever you come up with is going to be way more extreme than whatever the writer intended.
Yeah.
So she finally breaks down and is like, okay, fine, I'll type the word. And it's just this very staccato 4 keystrokes. The comedic timing on it is perfect. And you're left to
fill in the blank.
imagine what 4-letter word the good old captain was using.
Yes. Yeah, and this is a very liberating experience too. Like Lucy or Lucia is this is all very whoa for her, but it's simultaneously very liberating and broadening her world, and
She can embrace her own independence in this environment.
yes, she can. And so she starts in private saying all these basically curse words, which aren't really curse words from our perspective,
But
our
at the
modern
time would
perspective,
be considered rude.
but would be like, especially for a woman to be saying them, it would be intensely impolite. But anyway, so they write this book together, and
as they're getting towards the end of the book, rent has run out, collectors are starting to come after her, and things are desperate.
yeah, but she also, when they do finish this book that they've been writing together, I think she expected to feel a sense of relief, but instead she feels a sense of melancholy because while they were doing this together, they were moving forward together, they were accomplishing something, and it was bringing them closer, and it gave them a sense of unified purpose. And now that's gone, and she's suddenly starting to realize that, oh wait, I think I have feelings for this ghost man, but what future is there? Like what is this?
Well, yeah,
You know?
it's a moment of uncertainty on several fronts, because things are financially uncertain, because she's written this book, but she doesn't know if it's worth anything yet. She's got a bunch of debt collectors at her door. She's in love with a ghost.
Well, and it's really interesting too because Daniel, he kind of sees what's happening, and even though I'm sure he himself it's clear that he has feelings, he encourages her. He's like, you need to get out more in the world. Like someone like you owe it to yourself to go out and see if there's anyone worthwhile out there, and to find someone who can light your passion, make you happy.
Something that I noticed while this conversation was happening, they did some very, very clever cinematography during the scene. Specifically, they introduced a little bit of like a fog machine. She was mentioning, how her future, she honestly feels like it's very, it's very hard to see.
And this is occurring within the context of the story. Like, it is a foggy night, and she feels looking out into this fog and seeing nothing,
And so the camera, what they did was they actually like closed the aperture just ever so slightly during the duration of the scene. And it slowly and slowly gets darker and fuzzier and darker and fuzzier the longer it goes on.
Closer and closer on the characters. And creating a sense of like claustrophobia and dimming, you know?
Yeah. And it's like, it's this moment, it's the emotional beats and how they're conveyed in the camera. And there's also like some pretty clever like in-camera trickery with some of the ghost effects that make it pretty clear why this was nominated for an Academy Award for cinematography in this year.
Yeah. Yeah. So she goes into town with this manuscript. Daniel is very clear about, like, you need to see this particular publisher guy.
That he clearly knew in life somehow. So she goes into town. She's trying to seek an appointment. Town being London.
Yeah. So she's gone a long way. And she goes in. She tries to get an appointment with this guy. And, of course, the front desk clerk is just like, no, you don't have an appointment.
And who even are you?
Who are you? Go away, woman. But as Lucy was coming into the publishing house, a man catches sight of her, and he follows her into the offices, and he's like leaning suggestively,
more than that,
and leering at her.
He's very clearly leaving the building, sees her, and then doubles back into the building to follow her.
So he's like, while she's talking to the guy at the front desk, he is like leaning against the front desk right next to her, like leering at her, and she is doing what a lot of women do, which is studiously ignoring him. But he basically approaches her once she sort of steps back, and he's like, oh, what business do you have with Mr. Sproul or whatever his name is? And she's like, well, I she's very terse. Like, he's trying to flirt with her, and she is giving him nothing.
Okay, so this man is the actor. He voices Shere Khan.
Yeah.
So imagine Shere Khan's voice being very sultry, trying to allure this, young Lucy, trying to help him.
Yeah, he has a very deep, rich voice, but it's like...
What did you describe it as,
yes.
Jamie?
He has a voice like a Venus flytrap. It's alluring, but there's danger there.
Yes.
And the reason I was able to come up with that is because this actor played basically the same character in every movie he showed up in.
Yeah.
A shit stain?
But a charming one.
A very pretty shade stain.
Yes.
Well, pretty voiced shit stain. Because I don't think he was exactly...
Not terribly physically attractive, I would say, but the
but
voice.
His voice does make up for a lot. But anyway, so he's trying to woo her. She is giving him nothing. Her instincts, you can tell, are just like...
Her hackles are up.
But he does offer her the one thing she needs, where he's like, I actually had a meeting with Mr. Sproul, and I didn't want to wait, so now you can have my meeting. And she takes it. At first, Mr. Sproul, or whatever his name is, the publisher, is just like not having her being in there at all, because he's like...
I don't have time for women's literature.
Yeah.
It's also important to note that the very first moment that she enters, his back was turned and he was reading the manuscript
Of the shitty guy.
Of the shitty guy. So
Whose name, by the way, is Miles Fairley.
Shere Khan.
Yeah. So when she first enters, the publisher he doesn't know it's her yet, and he's assuming it's Miles Fairley. And he is like, this is like the shittiest manuscript I've read.
Except it was
ever.
1947, so he didn't say shittiest.
Yeah.
But the meaning was there.
But then he turns around and it's her, and he starts to shoo her out because he's like, I don't have time for women's literature. But she manages... Well, I think Daniel's actually there too. You don't see him, but you hear his voice, and he's like, come back here, you bastard or something.
Yeah, the captain occasionally is able to speak through other characters as part of his ghost powers.
I don't think it was through her. It's just like he was present but invisible in the room.
See, I had an internal debate about this because before he physically shows up, the maid starts using sailor's slang.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of think that maybe he was speaking through
that's
other
interesting.
people through the course of the film.
That there is that they made a choice where it's like they use his voice, but actually it's the
which is why everybody assigns this gruff, manly sailor's voice to
Lucy.
Darling Lucy.
Yeah.
And how else could they have made that mistake?
Yeah, but that catches the publisher's attention.
Yes.
He's just like, madam, like, whoa. And then she's like, well, it's not women's literature. This is about a sailor's life. And she gets his attention long enough, and he's like, well, I guess I'll read a few pages. And then he spends 3 hours
reading the
devouring
entire thing.
The entire book, and he's instantly like, I fucking love it. We are
it's 1947, so he didn't say that.
Yeah, he's like, we're absolutely going to publish this. This is amazing. Someday you'll have to introduce me to this captain because, I'm assuming you didn't really, this is not something you just came up with off the top of your head. And Lucy admits, no. But, she promises one day she'll introduce them because she just doesn't know what else to say.
Yeah.
And she leaves, and Mr. Fairley is still out there waiting for her. And so, yeah, she walks out. It's raining. She doesn't have an umbrella, but Mr. Fairley does. And he's trying every trick in the book to get her. He even hails her a cab, and then she gets in the cab, and the cabbie asks, where are you going? And she says, Victoria. And he's like, well, what do you know? That's where I'm heading. And he gets into the cab with her, and he's leaning into her space.
Here's the thing, though. Even before that, he was all just, sitting there on the stoop next to her being like, oh, well, you know what? I could hail a cab. And she just bolts past him.
Yeah, she honestly literally was just willing to go right into the rain than have him.
In her expensive hat that would be ruined by the rain.
That hat was pretty bitchin', though.
It was a great hat.
It was an entire pheasant on her hat.
All her outfits are great. But yeah, she was gonna bolt, and then he goes ahead and hails her the cab. Then he gets into the cab, and he's in her space, and you can tell she is just
there's maybe 8 inches between their faces, and that's being generous.
No, that's not even 8 inches. That's at least 2.
Yeah, no, it was an uncomfortable distance.
Proximity alert.
But they do get to talking because she can't avoid it, and he admits that he is actually the author of a bunch of children's books,
which she pretends that her daughter loves.
Uncle Ned?
Uncle
Nettie. And she is, that kind of softens her up to him a little bit. She's like, oh, okay. Well, maybe you're not as awful as you at first seem. So, he takes her to the train station. She gets on the train to go back home, and he steals her handkerchief, which is supposed to be a romantic gesture, but also is kind of fucking creepy, honestly.
Yeah, to a modern eye, he steals the handkerchief and then, sniffs it.
Yeah, essentially it's like huffing panties or something. It's weird.
It's a bad vibe.
Yeah. So, but by this point she's kind of intrigued by this because she's like, wow, I think for her she's like, wow, this man is giving me all this attention. He's very, very into me, and there's something great about being desired like that.
When she's probably at a place in her life where she kind of felt like she wouldn't be again.
Yeah.
Because it's stated earlier in the movie that she's middle-aged, which to a modern eye, Jean Tierney looks great in this entire movie.
And middle-aged in a Edwardian sense is probably maybe maybe you're 30. I don't know.
But again, to that era's definition, she is not a young woman. She is past sort of her prime childbearing years.
She's still very attractive, but she comes with a certain kind of baggage that a lot of men might not really be attracted to.
It was a different social dynamic, so she probably wasn't expecting a lot of attention.
Yeah, but here's this man who is voraciously pursuing her, and there's something kind of alluring about that and exciting about it. And so thus begins this sort of affair between them. And And when she gets back home, she has this conversation with Daniel, who is, despite the fact that their manuscript just got, like, purchased by this publisher, he's in a terrible foul mood because Daniel sees right through this. And he's like, that man is a snake, you know?
So Shere Khan refers to himself as being brass. And Captain Daniel says, brass, he says. I'll polish his brass.
Yeah.
Which I'm just like,
Phrasing,
sir.
Well, I mean, it's like clean your cloth.
Yeah, clean, but
I know.
there's a joke in there.
Yeah, there is a joke
But
in there.
anyway, but yeah, Daniel's like, not this one.
Yeah, he's like, Lucia? No, this guy, and she's like, are you jealous, Daniel? And he's like, kind of like, he's not admitting it, but it's basically like, well, yeah, I'm jealous, but also don't, like, that's not the point. This guy is a bad guy.
Well, and like later on, Uncle Nettie shows up on the periphery of one of Lucy's beach trips, having painted her in her swimsuit.
Yeah, he's been
without
like,
her knowledge.
He's been sitting on this bluff, like painting her in her swimsuit from afar, which is definitely by Edwardian standards,
Major
it is
red
very
flags.
like whoa.
Like,
and her housekeeper, she takes no prisoners. She's like, there is something wrong with that man. It's indecent. I don't like it. Like, you are going to make a fool of yourself, Lucy. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
However, that Captain Dan...
Well, yeah, she does like Captain... She doesn't know anything about Captain Daniel's ghost, but she does...
She likes the portrait.
She does like his portrait.
She likes the aesthetic of Captain Daniel to a point.
Like, how could you not?
Yeah. But so Lucy starts seeing this guy, Mr. Fairley, and he's very intoxicating. You know, again, that whole being wanted, being desired, so fully, so viscerally. She just falls for it hook, line, and sinker.
And all of this in spite of, like, all of her closest confidants are, like, telling her, like, warning her against it. Even her, like, own feelings are kind of warning her against it, but she, like, in the film says to her maid, who is also, like, her closest confidant, hey, I know this isn't ideal, but I need love.
Yeah. I need love. I need physical touch. I
was just thinking, did her daughter ever like have any like discussions about the
She didn't. She never like had a one-on-one
Like, on
meeting
screen.
with Nettie, but that's addressed later.
So on screen you never see Anna and Mr. Fairley interacting, but it is implied that they did later.
Yeah.
So Daniel essentially, after
this relationship escalates.
He's just like, you've been kissed in the orchard all over again. And he kind of lays it out for her. He's like, this is foolish. You are letting your
romantic notions get in the way.
Yeah, you're letting your romantic notions blind you to what this really is. And he's not always like, he doesn't always put it the right way. Sometimes he does get a little bit too judgmental, like, because he says some shit like, women, they're always following their impulses or blah 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 blah. So he says some like sort of generally misogynistic things and tries to tell her mind, and she does not like that. But
in the end, he's crass, but he's not cruel.
Yeah,
like, he's saying these things because he's worried about her, and kind of rightly so.
Yeah. And she gets it too. She actually is like, I know you're worried about me. They kind of end on a, like, let's agree to disagree note. But later that day, Daniel, like, while Lucy is sleeping, he kind of has this monologues to her. And while she's asleep, and he says, so, you're kind of following your worst instincts, or you've decided to be a fool. He's like, you can't, but then, and he's kind of, at first you're like, dang, that's harsh. But then he's like, but you know what? It's, you can't help it. You are a flesh and blood woman. You need these things in your life, but sometimes you make mistakes.
Yeah, you need to make your own decisions.
And you need to make those mistakes. Only you can chart your course, and I can't be here to
be in the way, interfere.
To be in the way of that. And I'm only going to confuse you by being here, because he knows that she loves him, and he definitely loves her. And he's like, this isn't going to work. I am dead. You're alive.
And you need to live.
And you need to live. And so he essentially bids her farewell, and he tells her, he puts this idea in her, like, sort of subconscious.
Inceptions her.
Yeah, he inceptions her, that, and telling her that, you know, this was all a dream. She dreamed it up. She came up with the book, just like looking at the effects of the house and being by the sea. She like dreamed this up, and he never was really there. It was all a dream, and then he sort of disappears and leaves like the visible part of her life.
What's also something to keep in mind, like, while this is happening, he's actually doing this in a monologue. She's currently asleep. She's, you know, in bed, tucked in, and he's just whispering this notion to her. And what's really a fascinating thing is, like, he goes over to the window with the telescope and stuff, and like he is about to end his monologue, and he's talking about, you know, how it's exceptionally important for her to, like, you know, to live and all this. And like all dreams must die. Yeah. And so
again, that whole life death thing.
Mm-hmm. And so his actual, like, physical presence, he slowly fades away, like, and it reveals the background. And then
the door shuts.
Yeah.
One last time, the window casement or whatever shuts. Whereas his first act as a ghost basically was to open it.
Mm-hmm. And just, you know, the effects of that time frame, that
time period. It was good effects.
Yeah, it was really powerful at that time.
Well, and as far as sort of like the blocking of the characters, like, even though she's asleep, he just gets like so intimately close to her as he's speaking to her, and like, even though they don't touch, they can't touch, there's just something so intimate, like,
so
sensual and romantic about it.
And the thing is, in this movie, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you guys, never do they once kiss. Never. And yet, it
they
feels
only touch
like
once.
Yeah, they only physically touch once. And yet it feels so
sensual,
so intimate and so romantic as a film that you almost don't notice it. Or you know, you kind of wish that maybe you might wish it was there, and yet it does so well without it. So anyway, he fades from her life, and he's like, you know, it was a dream, and like all dreams, it must die, and he makes his exit. Which, you know, you might assume that he's still maybe around, but he's never like interfering in anything.
Immediately after Daniel leaves, it's fairly clear that Miles Fairley, he's getting ready to propose to Lucy. At least that's what everybody in the household thinks.
Lucy insists that they are getting married.
And the housemaid is convinced that that's true, much to her horror.
Yeah, she's not taken. She is not okay with that.
But Miles is called away on business. At least that is the message that Lucy receives. And she's like, well, I need to go visit my publisher to sign some things anyway. Let me go to London visit Miles.
And catch him before he
leaves for the continent or whatever that he said he was doing.
Yeah.
And she goes to London and she signs the papers and she gets her very generous advance from the publishing company, which will allow her to outright buy the Sea Cottage.
Yeah.
Which she does. And then she goes to Miles' home. And there's family portraiture. And if you're paying close attention, you can sort of piece together what's about to happen when his wife shows up to greet her.
And, like, all things considered, his wife is pretty chill about the whole thing because they have this conversation, and of course Lucy is a bit frazzled by this turn of events, and she has this conversation with the wife, and the wife is like, you're a publishing
colleague.
Oh, you're a colleague. I so rarely get to meet them. Like, why don't you stay for dinner and wait for Miles to come back from the park playing with the children, which, by the way, Miles are his children, and he had told Lucy that he didn't like any children, but he could make an exception for hers. Oh, and there's also a point, like, sort of earlier where he's trying to seduce Lucy, and she's trying to go back and inside Gull Cottage because it's time for bed and she wants to put like Lucy to bed and she wants to go to bed too. And he's like, I'm jealous of a child. And I was like, oh my fucking God, that is so like disgusting and such a crazy red flag.
Yeah.
I'm like, a man being jealous of your child, girl, run the other way. Don't look back.
This man is throwing out more flags than a Russian army parade.
Yeah. So she's like, no, I don't want to stay for dinner. I'm going to leave. And the wife just sort of gently sort of touches her and she's like, I think I see what's happening here. And you should know it isn't the first time
Jess,
something like this has happened.
You used the phrase affair really early on in this recording.
Yeah, that
And-
wasn't an accident.
Whoops.
Whoops.
Hint
Yeah.
drop.
So she leaves. She's distraught. She's just like, wow, that blew up in my face. And yeah, I was a total fool. Back when Miles Fairley was creepily like doing a painting of her while she and her daughter were on the beach like swimming, her daughter and just sort of, I guess, some other guy from the neighborhood was carving her daughter's name into this piling. You know, just
On
kind
the
of being
seaside.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on the seaside, just kind of being a sweet guy.
Yeah, this wood piece of
And-
pier thing.
And he carves it in really deep so it'll stay there forever. And her daughter's, I don't know, like seven,
Yeah.
something like that at this time. So anyway, after the whole affair blows up in her face.
So you go to this beach scene and you see the pier and the name and you, I don't know, like there's just like
It's weathered.
yeah, it's weathered. There's essentially it's a montage of just
Time
ocean
passing.
waves passing and crashing against the coast and the pier, and then you cut back to it and it's like slightly lopsided. It has a little bit more weathering to it, and like you can actually see the coastline had actually kind of petered out just a little bit. And it's an interesting case of time has passed.
It was a great way of showing that.
Yeah.
Showing it in a way that wasn't too obtrusive, I guess.
it-
very, very organic and
Yeah,
natural.
it actually comes across, 2 or 3, maybe even 4
Yeah,
times.
we revisit this pier a couple of times, and like
So the first time is it's been a year since they moved into the house. And by this point, Daniel is like
a
out of the
distant memory.
Yeah, a distant memory, a dream. The second time is probably 20 years later.
Well, I wouldn't
Or
say that many. It's maybe
15.
10 because her daughter's in college, and, like newly in college, and brings home her new
boo.
boyfriend.
Her new boyfriend, who she is like, and we're getting married. And he's like,
Yeah, I suppose
I
if
guess
you keep
so.
saying that.
If you keep saying that, I guess I'll have to propose to you.
Lucy is like, you know what? Yeah, okay.
It's very clear that Anna has taken after Lucy because she is just as strong-willed, and she will have her way.
Yeah, and she's also just like, he's a lieutenant or something in the Navy, and she's like, how I have a weakness for sailors, and so they're having this conversation at the
And
table.
Lucy's like, why do you have a thing for sailors?
and she was like, oh yes, well,
do you remember
the
those
first.
stories we used to tell about that sea captain?
Well, she was like, the first year that we were here, the Captain Greg, and her mother and Lucy is just like, what did you say?
and it kind of starts coming back to
And
her.
it starts to like jog her memory, but she's still kind of in denial. But basically, like Anna is like, yeah, he used to visit me all the time in the first year of us living here, and he was so fun. And I was a little in love with him because he was just this kind but rascally, older guy who made time to just play with her or spend time with her and get to know her and talk to her, especially since they were kind of out in this somewhat I don't know, like remote cottage.
yeah.
So he made her life there for the first year just really fun. And she's like, ever since then, I've always wanted to marry a captain, and that guy in the other room, he's gonna fit the bill perfectly.
Yeah, basically.
There's also an interesting side story happening in the background, because you now understand that Anna has had experience with Captain Dan, and you're just like, oh, wait, so they had a whole bunch of interactions.
Yeah, there's this
So-
whole other movie that's happening opposite.
and you're
this.
like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, I love my ghost dad.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, that story sounds like that would have been I don't know, just like a great story also. If they had made a second parallel movie about that, that would have been just as rewarding, I think.
Although a notable aside, while doing some preliminary research in IMDb, I accidentally found the listing for The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, the sitcom, because apparently they did a television show adaptation of this film.
Oh my god.
And maybe that's something that they explored in the zany antics of a 7-year-old and a sea captain ghost, which I would love to see.
Yeah, well, and if anybody has ever watched that out there, please
let us know.
Yeah, let us know. I am genuinely curious. And maybe we'll go watch it at some point, but we have so much other stuff to watch.
Yeah, we have got a lot of things on our list.
And also, you know, clearly Captain Daniel did not
hold up his end of the bargain of not appearing to anybody but Lucy.
Yeah.
Clearly not.
He did not stay
because of course he didn't.
Away from Anna because, you know,
oh, he's such a rapscallion.
He's such a rascal, but like in the sort of like the best, the kindest, the most like positive way.
Yeah.
So they kind of talk about this, and Anna is very much like, Mom, if we both had the same experience, maybe it was real. And her mom is just like, no. Maybe I said something about my dream at some point and you kind of like fed off of that or whatever. You played off of that. But Anna is not convinced. Anna's like, I am 100% sure now that he was not a dream, that he was real. Not that anything comes of that. It's just like this really sort of affirming thing, I think, for Anna.
In this scene, Anna's like, I'm about to get married. I want you and Martha to move in with us because you two are out here on your own and it has to be lonely.
Yeah.
And Lucy says, I didn't have like all the romance and excitement I wanted in my life, but like me and Martha are making our own life here. Like I set out to make my own life at the beginning of this movie.
Well,
and I'm going to do that.
And she says that sometimes you can be lonelier among other people
than you are by yourself.
And, you do get the sense that she missed, that there were things that she wanted that she didn't have. But she doesn't regret her life. She does think that it was worthwhile. And again, yes, she did get to live her own life, and she did get to be her own woman, and she doesn't regret that. She doesn't resent it. And she loves this house, and she loves Gull Cottage. She loves being here, and she values the life she's built herself and like living there with Martha. And they take care of each other. They're two old ladies at this point.
Martha's great.
I love Martha.
Martha's
She's hilarious.
And then we get to our next time skip.
We get to the next time skip, and they're
at this time skip. It's one of the last ones.
I think it's the last one.
The last one, and the piece of pier with with Anna's name on it is essentially cast to the side.
Well, yeah, it's completely loose from the place in the sand it was dug in, and it's starting to like rock in the tide.
Yeah. So it's been quite some time now. And, Lucy and Martha are all like, white-haired, doddering old women and kind of bickering at each other.
Sisterly bickering.
Yeah, like...
Also, the makeup is actually really well
done.
done.
The age makeup for, like, the 40s?
Yeah.
Pretty incredible, because I was momentarily like, did they get different actresses?
Yeah,
it was convincing.
They did really
impressed.
good, like, aging makeup. So they're kind of bickering, and Lucy sits down. She mentions, like, Martha's brought her up this, like, glass of milk. Lucy sits down to sort of, take her afternoon nap or whatever, and she mentions that she has this pain in her arm, and Martha's very concerned about it, but Lucy waves her off.
This scene takes place, like, she's sitting down in the same spot as one of the earlier scenes whenever she first was introduced to Captain Daniel.
Yeah.
It's the favorite chair.
It's the favorite chair.
But it's not the favorite chair. It's a completely different chair.
But it's the same spot.
It's the same spot, but she started to alter the room. But also, like, in the time skip or two back, she had sat down. It was the year one. After a year, she sat down one afternoon. She was in the same chair, and she hears the chime of the clock, and she looks up, clearly recognizing this sequence of events from when Captain Daniel first shows up, and
the window.
She's waiting for something to happen, even though she thinks that this whole thing was a dream, and it doesn't happen, and she's disappointed. But anyway, so she, as an old woman, she sits down, she starts drinking this milk, and, you know, then she
It topples from her
she
hand.
drops the milk, and she is, like, clearly she has passed away. But then you see Captain, Daniel, the window opens, and you see Captain Daniel, like, step into the room, and he says, "Now, Lucia, you'll never be tired again." And he, like, reaches out, and she puts her hands into his hands, and when she, you know, stands up, she's young again.
It's her in her prime when they met.
And now they're together, and they look at each other, and it's this, like, super romantic thing. And he leads her down through the house, and
Taking the same route that he shoved her in-laws down.
yeah, he starts to go down through the house. You know, she looks back and she sees her body. And this is, like, right after she had gotten news from her daughter Anna that her granddaughter Lucy had gotten engaged. No, to a captain of a transatlantic flight.
Right, it was an air captain.
An air captain. So like she died at a time where, like, you know, she was. Like, she bickers a bit with Martha, but clearly something, like, happy has happened. And so she looks back at her body. They start down the stairs. They pass Martha. She says, "Martha," and Martha doesn't hear her. But she just smiles, and she's like, she's at peace. And then together, hand in hand,
they walk into the mist.
They walk out to the front door and into the mist, and presumably into the afterlife, like, where they will live and love forever, finally.
Okay, so 2 things. I think that was the very first time that he touched her.
It is.
Yes.
So he offered her his hand to her, and she took it.
This is the only time in the entire movie that they touch.
Yeah.
And another thing, did anybody else hear "Don't Fear the Reaper" being played in their head while this entire...
No, I can't say that.
But if there was a modern remake of this, I could definitely see it.
Oh my god, it just...
Yeah, no, I get it.
Okay.
But that's the thing about this story, too, that I really loved, is that the most intimate thing that happens that's, like, sort of physical is holding hands. And I think in a lot of ways, because it's, like, to me, I think I really appreciated that it doesn't equate
Love and sex, yeah.
Sex with love. And, like, you can have a very literally soul deep kind of soulmate love. And you don't have to prove that. You don't have to, like, show that by having them, like, mac on each other. Just know.
Again, like, just in the way that they interact with each other and the looks that they share and just sort of the witty banter that they share, it's very clear that they are very much in love. And it's sensual without involving touch.
Yeah.
But, and if I were to take a brief aside to be crass, there are several scenes in this movie where they are giving each other the fuck me eyes.
Yeah.
But it's also clear that it kind of doesn't need that.
That's not what it's about.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to Miles Fairley and just say,
what a creep.
God, what a creep this guy was. I also want to say, I thought it was really interesting how over the course of the movie, there's also this sense that the house, they multiple times they talk about the house as if the house has a spirit of its own and its own wants and desires that calls to them.
Captain's.
Yeah, it's not, the captain is not the soul of the house. The house has its own wants and needs. And it's kind of a small thing, but I thought that was really interesting. That was an interesting choice. It's not like that's one of the deeper themes where it's played on and built on and stuff, but I thought that was interesting, that distinct kind of soul.
Could you kind of elaborate with that? Because I honestly didn't catch that the first.
So there's one time in the text where it's explicitly said, and that's at the beginning where Lucy first meets the captain in the kitchen. The first night after she moves in, she's, in trying to convince him that he shouldn't, like, haunt them out of the house. She's like, when I saw this house, it called to me. It wanted me to help it, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he kind of believes her.
He absolutely believes her.
He also seems to believe that the house has wants and needs.
That the house has a spirit, and he also talks about how he had a ship that he saved.
Right. That he saved from dry dock, and it was rotting, and he refurbished it, and he says something like, it sailed twice as fast for me than it would under anybody else.
Yeah.
And that was great for
this whole thing of inanimate, these places, these places where we reside having a unique and specific kind of spirit.
This movie is all about romances of the spirit, and that includes objects.
Yeah, and romances, but also just connections between one thing and another, one person and another.
Places.
And, places and people and ideas. Ideas being also really important because ideas can be great.
They can have a life of their own.
They can have a life of their own, but they can also blind you. For instance, she fell in love with Miles because
the idea of a man.
She fell in love with the idea of Uncle Nettie, essentially, honestly. And she, he's such a creep, but she ignores all of that because she really does. She wants to have this romance, and she has decided, somehow in her mind, she has, and I feel like this is a very human thing to do. I've known lots of other women and men who have made this mistake to sort of project their dreams on this person, totally ignoring their behavior. A lot of people
have made that mistake in their lives.
Yes, and totally losing sight of who they really are, but she really connected to that dream. But I think a lot of the things Lucy really wanted, the things that were ideal for her, she saw and she found in Daniel, and she's not really projecting them onto him because they're there, but he is also intangible.
He's something of an idea himself.
He's something of an idea himself, and so it's while he has all of these traits, he is also completely intangible. And
at one point he even says, as long as you believe in me, I am here.
Yeah.
Which makes him more of a belief than a person, almost.
Yeah, well, there's clearly a connection between, he is really there, his spirit is there, but there's some sort of connection and pulling him into
being,
into seeing is believing, and believing is seeing, sort of thing. So there's a lot to be said. I'd have to think about it a lot longer. And a lot more, I guess, in a focused way. But there's so much to be said about this movie and how it connects love and connections and ideas and romance and spirit and mind and all these other things. But I was going to say about Miles Fairley that he was such a fucking creep the entire time. As a teenager, I didn't quite understand how creepy it was. It's interesting because, I knew he was kind of
an inkling of it.
Yeah, I was wow, he's kind of forward. But as an adult, I'm oh my God.
I see all the warning signs.
This man is so, girl, run away, run away. Your instincts are telling you this is bad, bad, bad. You should listen to them. Listen to your first instinct. But it's also really funny because later in the story, she talks about how, in one of the flash forwards, she talks about...
I was just about to say that my absolute favorite quote when it had to do with Uncle Nettie was, I saw him 5 years ago. He was bald and fat, and he drank too much, and he cried. And his wife left him.
It was interesting because she didn't even say it like that intensely. She was he was bald and fat and he drank too much and cried. and
then his wife got tired of him and left him. That was the middle-aged Lucy time skip when she was in her 50s, maybe her 50s.
The sort of schadenfreude that all...
he got what was coming to him in the end, and it was okay.
Yeah. So I was there is justice in the world. Or I guess at least in the Hollywood idea of the world, there is justice. But anyway, so I don't know. I mean, do you think that it's time to begin transitioning over to dessert and our takeaways?
I do.
Same here.
All right. All right, so dessert round, takeaways.
Yeah.
So for me, again, it's always so interesting to watch something after like sort of a lot of time has passed, particularly when you watch something when you were a child or an adolescent, and then coming back and watching it as an adult. You know, of course, as an adolescent, as a teenager, I was like, I loved the romance. I still love the romance. But I still, like, I was very sad about how it all worked out. You know, of course, it's like, he's a ghost. She's a flesh and blood woman. How is this going to work? And I was always, like, kind of sad that, I don't know, something magical didn't happen so that they could be together.
Well, there's a lot more nuance whenever you're older for it that you don't necessarily pick up when you're younger.
A maturity that you bring to it.
But I didn't always understand the nuance of their characters, you know, and I saw the contradictions and, you know, wasn't necessarily connecting that, like, those are very human contradictions. When you're a teenager, you aren't necessarily always very good at understanding the complexities of...
Well, because you're not very complex yourself at that time.
Or if you are, you kind of aren't as capable of seeing it. You just don't have the experience to have that bird's eye view. So anyway, as a kid, you know, I think with a lot of media, even if you don't really understand the nuances of something at the time, it can still sort of leave an imprint on you. Honestly, I think most media that we consume, all of it leaves traces.
Hence this podcast.
Yes. Now, a lot of those things are just going to be like, that
happened.
It doesn't leave much of an impression on you. It basically, usually it's because it basically met your expectations to the point that it made very little impression at all. It's just like, oh, okay, that followed exactly what I thought it was going to do, and it wasn't particularly interesting. Then there's the works that you watch that they defy your expectations, and maybe not in a good way. Mm-hmm. And those stick with you because your brain is trying to figure, like, at least for me, I think for a lot of creatives, your brain is trying to figure out why it didn't work.
What went wrong here?
Which, interestingly, most of the time, like, you don't like it. But sometimes you do like it. Sometimes it's like, it's total trash, it doesn't work, but it's, like, fascinating.
The delightfully bad.
Yes, which we will talk about
we'll get into
on
those.
Here. And then there are the things that they do leave a distinct impression on you, pretty much no matter when you see them. If you are a kid or a teen at the time, maybe you don't have the words, maybe you don't have the tools to really understand why you like them or why they resonated with you. But as an adult, you do. You can kind of start to piece together what you were feeling back then. And you can see how whether you realized it or not, subconsciously was informing what you did after. And I feel like The Ghost in Mrs. Muir is kind of like that for me. From a character perspective, like, this is just a really fantastic movie. You know, most of the characters are very dynamic. You know, you just on the surface, you have that really classic movie, just like punchy dialogue. Nothing's wasted. It's very clever. It's very charming. But also, everybody's just very human in all the contradictory ways that people are. Lucy she wants to be her own person, and she clearly can push back against other people without being belligerent, just, you know, enforce her boundaries. And yet she also is insecure. This is the first time striking out on her own, and she doesn't really know what she's doing. And so there are times where that confidence, that adventurousness kind of like crumbles before her temporary fear and anxiety. Mm-hmm. And also she's a very perceptive woman, and yet, just like what happened with Mr. Fairley and what happened with her late husband.
Well, she blinds herself.
She can delude herself because she wants something so bad. She wants that whirlwind, passionate romance so badly that she is willing to ignore a lot of really worrisome things along the way. And that is very human. I mean, I've known people like that. I'm sure probably pretty much everybody, out there has known somebody like that or has been that person.
If you don't know that person, you might be that person.
Yeah, or has been that person. And I think we all at some point in our lives have probably dated somebody who we were more into the idea of them than the reality, and we ignored a lot of not great stuff. Yeah, because we didn't want that to take this idea from us. So that's her. And then you have, of course, Captain Daniel, who is...
It's very clear that he lived kind of a wild youth and never really settled down.
Yeah,
But
and
Three or four women.
yeah, well, but and he also has some sort of sexist attitudes, which are not great. And yet, it's interesting because he has this. He does have he does say that there's some general stereotypes, but he isn't judgmental about it either. It's weird. He's just
This is he's accepting of it, and this is kind
he's
of a thing.
We're all
whatever.
fallible humans kind of thing.
yeah, we're all fallible humans. He does say some shit about women can be very impulsive or foolish or whatever. But then he's also just but I mean, who isn't?
Well, and by his own turn, he was I was a hellion teen, and my aunt who adopted me probably wanted rid of me. So he's everybody's got their shitty things. But notably, he softens around Lucy because he's and he sort of waxes poetic about if we had overlapped, if our lives had overlapped, maybe we could have been together.
Yeah, maybe we could have been great.
Yeah, it's clear that he may have settled down with her, or at least they would have adventured together.
Yeah, although, you could debate over whether that ever could have happened.
It
because
may have just been a romantic notion.
Well, because if he hadn't died, she would not have gotten Gull Cottage.
Sure,
blah, blah,
but
blah,
we're
blah,
not
blah.
entertaining that hypothesis.
But anyway, yeah. But he struggles with his own feelings of jealousy, and he wants to do right by her and sort of by himself, but he struggles because he does care about her and he doesn't want to see her make mistakes, and he can be brash and he can let his temper get the better of him, and he can basically try to tell her mind when that is not a winning strategy, and he knows it. And so he's also very deeply human, but he's an interesting sort of guy. Like Lucy, he's full of contradictions. He is this gruff sailor guy who is clearly very compassionate and plays with her kid and treats her like a
peer, an equal.
like a peer, an equal,
Well,
a person worthy of that. Her obstinacy and her pushback, things that all these other men and women are telling her are flaws, he is encouraging them because he sees them as
the strengths that they are.
As the strengths that they are.
Well, and notably, he wanted his legacy for his home to be donated to retired sailors in need, and he goes on this whole monologue about he wants to take care of these men because nobody else wants to.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about how they're doing this incredibly dangerous, unforgiving, dirty job, and people sneer at them. And so it's very he clearly has a strong sense of social justice and humanity. And it's very interesting. I found I really like Lucy's character because she is a strong woman, but she's one of those strong women I like all kinds of strong women. But I find it particularly interesting when you show a woman who is so sort of strong in her position, her sense of being a woman or something, that she just sort of when obstacles are put up in front of her for being a woman, she just sort of
breezes past
them. Yeah, an interesting, in a weird way, somehow hijacks the whole the system that is meant to oppress her by just in a very, like, I don't know, a sneaky kind of way.
She is so polite in pushing for what she wants that she would make it awkward for anybody to press back.
Yeah, I find that a really interesting dynamic.
It's social judo is what it
Yes.
is.
And in the case of Captain Daniel, I just find him really interesting because he is kind of this crass and rude person, and yet he's very perceptive, very earthy, and very, like, despite sometimes saying some sexist shit, being ultimately a feminist himself.
Well, and there's a character or two in your own works that may reflect some of those same traits.
That's sort of like that interesting, like, you know, at first you think you wouldn't like them.
You're a bastard, but you're an ethical bastard.
Yeah, you're a bastard, but you treat people equally. You're an equal opportunity bastard in every sense of the word. And I think that's a really... You are an honest asshole. I think I like that character archetype of an honest asshole, because I fucking can't stand Miles Fairley because he's
duplicitous.
He's duplicitous. He is such a skeezy guy, but he's pretending that he's, you know, not, or whatever. But at least Captain
Greg, where you stand with Captain Greg.
Yeah, he's completely out there. He is honest.
I just find it interesting that the more rounded character is actually the one that's dead.
Yeah.
Because in
death kind of gives you that kind of
clarity.
Like,
clarity, doesn't it?
clarity, because transparency.
Hey.
No. Okay, so my thought was, like, Uncle Neddy, whatever his name is. I don't...
Miles Fairley.
Shere Khan, whatever. Like, he is a skeeve. You know he's a skeeve. And that's all his character arc is.
Yeah, he's pretty flat. He's pretty flat. Yeah, I really like it when... I can't stand assholes who try to pretend that they're not assholes. But Captain Daniel Gregg... He is an honest asshole, and I can respect that. I respect...
Because at least you know where you stand.
Because at least you know where you stand, and you can...
the assholes.
and you can, you know, you can work with that. You can't work with somebody who is constantly trying to bamboozle you. I can't fucking deal with that. But so for me, I think this is a fantastic story, a really unusual romance. A really unusual story that has an unusual ending that you would think is bittersweet, but actually by the time you get to it at the end, it's just sweet. You wouldn't think that a story about having to, like, live your whole life and then die to be with the one you love would be a sweet ending, and yet it somehow manages to do it.
Well, weighed against the value of eternal love, everything else
exactly
looks small.
So
we also had a discussion about whether or not they were walking, you know, like hand in hand into the afterlife, or were they considering staying in the...
Or did they stay in the home they loved? But I think what we ended up deciding was they probably did walk into the afterlife, because she did leave the house.
They both left the front door.
Well, they went through the front door, and also the work was complete. She was able to will the house
to the needy sailors.
But
also, like, there's the visual language of they cross the threshold, they enter the clouds. Like, it's all very final.
Yeah. So what I took away that kind of that definitely formed me as a teen, even before I was really conscious of it, and then continues to inform me now, is just this character work and some of these character archetypes that I really enjoy. And yeah, so that's been with me quite a long time and will remain with me going forward.
So for my part, first of all, what Jess said about the character work, this is truly, like, one of my favorite romance tales in any medium, honestly. But aside from that, sort of more towards, like, my shtick, so dialogue in this film. So we've got two layers of things that I enjoy. The first layer being classic film dialogue in the Hays Code, where they had to be very clever about any sort of naughty subject that they had to address. They had to address in very clever ways, which ends up being both funnier and dirtier, depending on how it's executed. The second layer of the dialogue that I enjoy here is that this movie is set in the Edwardian era and is fairly true to it in terms of sort of like the comedy of manners that you end up encountering. So there's a lot of like really witty repartee between the two romantic leads, obviously. But also Lucy and Martha have just incredible quips.
Lines.
Martha's
Stone cold savage.
Yeah, she's a stone cold savage. She gives as good as she gets. It's fantastic. And they also, on multiple occasions, pull this wonderful trick that I always enjoy, where you have three characters holding two conversations with the same set of dialogue. Because Lucy will be talking to a living person and to Daniel, and responding to Daniel in a way that the living person also
interprets as
responds
part
to.
of their
and
conversation.
That is something I always love. That's a clever trick that I'm a sucker for that. In terms of plot structure, again, God, this romance. I don't write a lot of romance myself. At least I don't center it in a lot of my stories. But honestly, if you need a way to study romance,
like
honestly,
a really thoughtful and, I don't know, transcendent sort of romance.
And even like strictly from a story structure, like if you need a study piece, this is a good version of, I would say, a chivalric romance.
Yeah.
Because and chivalric romance emerged, I want to say, the late Middle Ages, and one of the key things about it is sort of this pining for a woman that you cannot have because she belongs to someone else is a theme of a lot of these things.
It's more like the mid to high Middle Ages.
And what you see here is like Captain Greg, the limit here is not that Lucy belongs to another man, it's that she belongs to another plane of existence.
Yeah.
But there's still like this pining of a love that you cannot fulfill.
And
it is a chivalric romance told in a more modern context.
The love is still worth pursuing. The love is still worth feeling and experiencing.
And so in that way, it's kind of like, it is updating a very old genre. And that is also something I very much appreciate. Like taking story structures that have been hanging around and maybe gathering dust for a couple of centuries and giving it just this fantastic new life. And then something else that I noted in terms of sort of like story and plot structure is the way this story plays with time, and it was very jarring for me initially, actually. I had some initial discomfort with it because the vast majority of like the meat of the plot takes course over a single calendar year. And with just the sheer number of events that happen with sort of this developing romance and the writing and publishing of a book and the beginning and ending of this sort of torrid love affair with this skeezy man, it all happens in the course of a year, which we're all humans living human lives. A lot can happen in a year. But that's one of those years that seems like it lasted a decade.
Yeah, because it was so
impactful in her life. And then the rest of her life spans maybe 20 minutes in the rest of the film.
Yeah, but and spans probably like 40 years or something like that.
And so that's jarring, but it's also like very intentional, and I think it's very clever. So I guess my takeaways from this are, again, the thing I love in all classic movies is just like the extremely well-written, witty dialogue.
Well, and this reinforced that as you were growing up as a creative.
Yes, like I was soaking all of these things in and wanting to emulate them, and this was definitely part of that set of movies that was highly influential for that for me. But also like that reaching into sort of these old formulas, like these enduring romantic tales, and taking the things that people have responded to for centuries, and like there's a reason for that, so you hold on to it and you try to reflect it in your stories now. And being okay with playing with time, stretching and squishing it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of new writers, and I'm including myself in that because I haven't got a lot of finished projects under my belt, I feel like there's a temptation to like sort of tell every act, like fill the gaps between every event, sort of like fill the space, and like how did the character get from A to B, and sort of like fill the entire thing in. But what really matters is stretching and shrinking time to serve the themes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Mitch.
So, most of my takeaways involve setting. The house itself.
Oh my God. The
Cottage core
house.
perfection.
Cottage
Gull
core perfection.
Cottage.
So the captain himself was the architect and was he the builder?
He must have been, at least partly.
Partly the builder. Okay. There's a bay window with a telescope pointing towards the open ocean.
Yeah, there's a veranda. So I don't know if it's a bay window. It is a full on these are like window doors that you can walk out onto the balcony to look out across the ocean.
They have the front door, which it's a grand front door, and they have shutters on either side, but they're actually like full-fledged
They're also
panels,
windows,
doors.
yeah.
And so you have a really fun kind of vibe there. You only see 4 actual rooms of this house, but this house is actually fairly massive. You have
For being called a cottage.
Yeah,
for being
for a
called
cottage. Yeah.
cottage. You have the foyer. You have the scullery, which might I say
Kitchen and scullery or whatever.
kitchen scullery. Modern day age. Why don't we have like a grand kitchen with a scullery like wall section anymore? So when I say scullery wall section, this thing is a wall and there's a pantry section and the rest of
Basically
it is
a gigantic horseshoe of cabinets.
Well, yeah, there's
Yeah.
a bunch of cabinets. There's like an inset, like big giant like oven area at
cast
stove
iron-
area.
cast iron stove area.
Yeah, and then there's a huge a washing area.
Yeah, there's a 3-faucet apron sink that spans probably the size of a rather large window. And then you also have on the side, you have this fire, like wood fire stove area that heats up your water as well. And like the entire kitchen area takes up, I don't know, it takes up like 5 or 6 different scenes, and a good chunk of some of the conversations happen around in this kitchen.
Yeah, and every time we were just like, damn, that kitchen.
Salivating over
Yeah.
this kitchen that's the size of maybe a third of our house.
Seriously. And then there's the bedroom. The bedroom also has a lot of story plot driven areas because
Well, it's where the favorite chair is.
it's where the favorite leather chair, you know, your stereotypical like man's man leather bound chair.
the captain's wingback chair
With-
that he died in.
Yeah.
which has, you know, several buttons inlaid into it. And this chair is it's sort of centered to the room. I mean, right next to it is the large bed, but you
A
only
nice
have
vanity.
yeah, a nice vanity, but like the chair itself faces the painting of Captain Daniel that, you know, Lucy installs.
Yeah, previously it had been like sort of a seascape, but
Yeah,
then
generic
she
seascape.
brings, you know, his
Yeah.
portrait in.
And then there's whenever Shere Khan is his name is Shere Khan.
That's
in my
fine.
eyes.
It absolutely
In my
is.
notes, whenever Shere Khan is trying to woo her, as it were to say, and gives her the painting, which
That he made
mind
of
you,
her, like in her her full body like bathing suit, but still back
Mind
in the
you-
day, they're like, oh, that's so uncouth.
I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a painting. It looks more like a
looks like a
charcoal
charcoal,
drawing
yeah.
to me, but the artist
But
takes
you're a graphic
whatever.
designer / artist, and so of course that's the thing that you'd be like, no.
No,
Let us not quibble.
I will die on this hill. Anyway, she kind of like hangs this painting right next to Captain Daniel's like humongous painting.
Well, yeah,
It's
that's
like
an
a side
interesting
note.
visual parallel because, like, there's the image of Daniel and the image of Lucy together.
Yeah.
They're hanging side by side
And
on the
yet-
wall.
and yet-
the image of her was
It's an
painted by Skis Bag.
Yeah, and yet
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's so much like interesting tension in just that shot and in just these two portraits being side by side, and that is so interesting.
Another interesting part about that compositionally. So his portrait is rather large, and the predominant colors are, I mean, it's a black
It's
and
a black
white
and white
film, but his predominant features are mostly black because his coat is black, his, you know, the weather outside is black, it's dark and stormy, so on and so forth, and his face is exceptionally...
It's the focal point.
It's the focal point, and it's exceptionally bright and light, whereas with hers, most of her painting and stuff is predominantly white sands, and you have like very like delicately etched lines and stuff like that with her, like,
but what
her
your eye
form
is
is
drawn to
darkness.
is her figure,
And it's
which
her
is
body.
emphasized by her dark swimsuit, and the sort of juxtaposition of like the emphasis in his portrait is on his face and sort of his, you know, his character and stuff, and for her it's mostly about her body. And
dare you use the word juxtaposition?
and it, you know, it's very like, it's objectifying in a way. It's like, it's supposed to flatter her, but it's objectifying. And so you have,
it's a painting of an Edwardian woman in her bathing wear.
yeah.
Which would be found in a
Scandalous.
gambling parlor, not in a fine lady's home.
Yes. And like, because Lucy is an adventurous spirit, a free spirit, she's like, there's nothing wrong with that. But like, but it's still, it's uncomfortable. Because again, like you said, while now their portraits are together and there's sort of this semblance of like, oh, look, her and Daniel, they're like sharing the same space because their portraits are on the same wall. There's also this like, but Skeezy guy did this.
Yep.
And he's kind of like, there's this weird sort of like tension between him and Captain Daniel and who is going to have, you know, who's going to hold her affections. And so it's just such a compelling thing.
It's just such an interesting kind of like idea of who necessarily deserves your attention, I guess, in a sort of weird way.
They're definitely playing with that in that scene, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the house, though.
The house is great. I also want to talk about her aesthetics because we honestly haven't.
Oh god,
Yeah.
the clothes.
Oh, the clothes are so good.
Okay.
Oh, the clothes are so good.
I'm going to take a brief aside as the guy who's super into historical clothing here. So, again, Edwardian drip throughout the film. Honestly, as far as historical costuming in film goes, this, as far as my understanding goes, this movie does a pretty good job of capturing that 1910s look. Like, all the men's clothing, they have those sort of, like, weird, like, high-waisted cuts. Realtor Man is wearing the weird, like, driver's jodhpurs and cabbie hat.
He also has like this weird kind of shoulder cape coat thing.
The Ulster... Oh my god, the Ulster coat.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Also, Lucy, in one of the summary scenes, is seen wearing an Edwardian lingerie dress, which is an absolute delight and very much of the period.
Yeah.
So would you want to describe a little bit about it?
So the lingerie dress, probably the example in film that everybody, or at least most people, is Mary Poppins towards the end of the Mary Poppins film with Julie Andrews, the big white, very like light and frilly summer dress that she wears.
Yeah.
It's made of like dozens of layers of this extremely fine cotton, and she just looks like a cloud floating across the beach side. It's fantastic.
Well, I think like what I would say is
with big mutton sleeves and everything. Yeah.
I think what I would say that is definitely inaccurate is the makeup.
Oh yeah,
because
no, like
that's very 1940s
it's 40s makeup because
makeup.
they would not have dark lips like that.
Well, it's kind of like how Titanic did a fantastic job
Except
in
for the
wardrobe,
makeup.
except for the makeup, because
most
they still
movies fall down on the makeup.
Yeah.
And it also shows the progression of time through wardrobe.
It does. It does do that.
After the first time skip, it's clearly like sometime in the 30s because the cut of Lucy's wardrobe completely changes to those
Her
like
hair also.
her hair changes. She always has that sort of like double bun at the like base of her skull, but sort of the way the rest of it's arranged changes with time. But like, you know, in the 30s she has this sort of like almost like a business jacket kind of thing going on, like the two-piece thing that was big with ladies at the time. And then there's the time skip to what would be the modern day when the film came out sometime in the mid-40s. except they're two elderly women, and those are the only people seen, and they're still kind of wearing slightly older clothes
kind of
for the time.
frumpier clothes. Like, it doesn't matter if it was, like, 1947 or if it had been, like, 1970. It doesn't matter because they're old ladies and they're wearing frumpy
they
clothes.
get an exception for that.
So they were very thoughtful about that.
Honestly, yeah, I forgot about the hamometer.
Yeah, I was going to come back. I was like, okay, how is this on the ham
we
meter?
gotta know. We gotta know.
Honestly, because of how straight it
Straight it's played, yeah.
I want to say it's like a 2.5 to a 3.
Okay, break it down for us.
Where is the ham coming from?
Because there is ham.
Yeah, there's a little bit of ham. Most notably, Shere Khan.
Shere Khan is
Shere Khan
Miles.
himself has about 2. And honestly,
Did the in-laws win the half point?
Yeah,
Is that where it comes from?
in-laws win half
They're
point.
caricatures.
The mother-in-law herself has 0.3, and the sister-in-law has 0.2. Because
Okay.
the mother-in-law is just that much worse.
She just,
Well,
she is.
She is the caricature of the emotionally manipulative mother-in-law.
The emotionally manipulative, hysterical.
Well, yeah, she spends all of her time on-screen time in histrionics.
Blubbering, yeah.
All of it.
And it's like, yeah, she might genuinely be sad, but she's also using that to try to
using that
control
sadness.
everyone else around her. And
Also, like, this is veering off of the hamometer briefly, but I got to address a visual element that we did not address, and it's the very first one in the entire movie. The movie opens in this Victorian parlor with 3 women in black, because they're all in full mourning gear, and I found that just such a striking visual. It's like,
well, it tells you a lot.
yeah, it's
right off the
it's an
bat.
immediate tone setter.
And I don't know if it was the parlor. It seemed like it was like the kitchen or dining room.
But it's this very striking opening visual, and it just puts you right where you need
Tells
to
you
be.
exactly, like, a whole bunch right off the bat, which is like kind of your jam.
It is.
So, not a lot of ham. Maybe, like, there are, like, well, Martha...
It's a thin slice of ham.
If I was to do the hamometer, I would give some to Shere Khan, not necessarily to the in-laws, because it's like they're being over the top in not a hammy way, in a very specific,
It's kind of a
targeted
calculated way. That's fair.
The other part of the ham that I would say that Martha is the comic relief character.
This is true.
And she
Yeah.
would
The
have a
comic
little
relief
bit of
servant.
ham.
I would argue that some of the ham comes from, and this is going to be controversial, I think, but from the captain's voice.
Oh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
shit.
Because,
yeah.
He is the ideal romantic lead, but he talks in this very overblown, gruff way.
Okay.
Which plays with the edge of being grating, but it's just
Yeah.
so endearing that you can't help but like
So-
it.
Yeah.
So, okay, just take a step back, reevaluate the hamometer. It is now a 3.5. 1 point dedicated to the captain because
The cackle, the evil cackle at the
He's got a
beginning.
really
Yeah,
good,
that's
like-
1 point by itself.
Yeah. But yeah, so, I think we agree that it's kind of low on the ham meter, but there's
some ham
some
there.
levity
There's
in
some
ham
ham.
there.
it's thinly sliced ham.
Yes. So, yeah. I mean, this is a fantastic movie. I would recommend it to anyone, especially anyone who really likes romance.
Or if you just like comedy, there's a fair bit of that to go around
yeah,
here too.
or if you just like classic movies and that like classic movie, like very smart, quippy dialogue. There's a lot of reasons to watch this movie. So
if you just like fun outfits, there's plenty to be had here too.
yeah, and probably if you've listened this far, I would assume that you at some point have, maybe paused somewhere along the way to watch it, or you watched it before even coming to this episode when we hopefully, put up an announcement about what we are going to be watching this week.
But even if we've completely spoiled it for you, it's still worth watching.
It is
'cause
so
the
worth watching.
experience of actually going through it, it's going to be better than listening to us.
Yeah,
yammer
definitely.
about it.
But I think that's The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. It definitely is one of my favorite classic movies, for sure. And it did leave a deep impression on me then and now. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us at the table this week. I think it's time to
Clear
pick up
the
the plates, clear everything away.
With all these dog distractions, I think I'm going to put a plate specifically down for them.
Yeah, we're gonna give them the table scraps and let them sup upon them. We're going to do that. Take care of our peppers. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll be back next week, and we will save you a seat at our table. If you want to invite anybody else to come join us, we would love to have them. Go ahead and share a link. Yeah, the more at our table, the merrier. So
This table has leaves.
this table has leaves. We can insert more to accommodate more people. So anyway, all right. Well, and with that, I think we will go ahead and bid you guys adieu. We'll work on the dishes. We'll see you next week.
Now shove off!
Yeah.